Hello, hello, hello. Happy Wednesday, everyone. Guys, I am so excited to have this conversation today. This is a little bit of a different thing because this is actually, Corinne is a member of my locals community. And we got to talking, and she told me about a program that she had developed to put a wellness officer, I believe, on every police force in the country with at no cost to the police force. And when she laid out this plan for me, I have to tell you guys, I don't impress easily. I actually have very high standards. I expect a lot from people, and I was blown away at the plan that she laid out. From my perspective, mental health and wellness has always been a key part of this equation, because I absolutely believe in reforming the way that police officers are trained. I believe there's a conversation we can have about that. But when you take care of people's wellness and their emotional health, that's going to go a long way towards reducing some of these incidents we see, because people are able to approach it with a more clear head and all that good stuff. And I'm not going to go into it because I don't want to steal Corinne's thunder at all. So without further ado, let me introduce her. Emma Corinne Dopp is currently sworn as a reserve officer while finishing her degree in public health and preparing to implement a pilot program inside a police department for an internal whole wellness framework. She served 3 years as a patrol officer before encountering life-altering challenges that sent her on her current trajectory. Her mission is to bring resources to the law enforcement community in a tangible way for each officer, regardless of the department size or time served. I have put her LinkedIn contact information in the description below in case you want to get in touch with her and talk to her about piloting the amazing program that she's going to tell us all about today. Welcome. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here, Carlin.
Absolutely. Well, maybe we could just start at the start. And listen, I mean, okay, so guys, let's get a couple of housekeeping businesses out of order first. So number one, if you're here, please hit that thumbs up button. Tell YouTube that you like the content so far. I promise this is going to be good. Number two, I just want to lay some expectations. So we are going to talk about what it's like to be a police officer nowadays and the experiences that many of them have and what you should know if you have law enforcement in your family. But I will say that simply because the George Floyd body cam footage did come out last week, I suspect you guys might have some questions about that. Sadly, Corinne cannot answer them because it is an ethical obligation. She can't answer questions about ongoing investigations, and so if questions come up of that nature, she's going to tell us what she can and can't answer. But I just ask for you guys to be understanding. And lastly, I know she looks like she's 18, but she's actually not. She's very blessed. She is a real live police officer. So maybe we could start off just by you giving us some background about how you became a cop, because this was not your life plan. This kind of happened to you, right?
That's true, yes. I was 28 when I came to the crossroads where I had that decision. When I think about a fiction novel and what sells, I think a lot about the way that we want things to make sense. We want a beginning and an end and excitement and drama. What my life has taught me is that my life is stranger than fiction, and sometimes there are not a lot of good answers. I grew up in Los Angeles, and the way that I described the part of Los Angeles that I grew up in was a social intervention playground. There were lots of different kinds of experiences that I had, and when I came to the crossroads that I was presented with the opportunity of considering going into law enforcement, I laughed hysterically and did not ever think that I would end up there. I had a lot of different life experience.
Yeah. So what made you make the decision to become a cop?
Well, I was interacting with an investigator, and that interaction was a point where I found myself reevaluating my relationship with my community and where I came from, how I grew up. And in that conversation, he said, you should really consider coming into law enforcement. And like I said, I laughed hysterically, and then I thought about it, and I think a lot of law enforcement have a similar origin in the reason why they reference it as like a call. You hear a call and you want to answer it. One thing before I go much further that I really want to clarify is that this is my experience. This is anecdotal. I can't speak for other officers or departments. This is all my experience. And from my experience, when I heard that call originally, that original sense, it was the desire, the sincere desire to be able to take light into darker places, my experience, and go that direction to create connection while protecting and serving a community and enforcing the law. So I thought about that, and when I was considering that, I decided that I should go for a ride along. And I think that anyone who's considering going into law enforcement needs to do that, to talk to people who are in the field. And when I went on the ride along, my very first ride along, I sat for a shift with a sergeant who spent pretty much 10 hours telling me why I should never go into law enforcement and why he had spent the last 10 years every day telling himself that it was his last day, but always found a reason to come back to it because of the community that he served. And we talked about a lot of really hard concepts of the realities of being in law enforcement. And so I left that right along, kind of encouraged more that this was the right direction because of his honesty, which I really appreciate. And I think that in most conversations that I've had with people who are in the field, they're pretty honest about their experience if you take the time to ask them questions and talk with them about it. And so in the state that I serve in order to become a police officer, you have to get sponsored by a law enforcement agency and attend a basic law enforcement training. And so during that process, where I did the ride along and where the detective was that introduced this concept to me, I went to a captain there and did the interview for the sponsorship. And he kind of told me that it is different, a different situation. You're not exactly the normal person that comes in to do this kind of interview, but I think that I'm gonna, yeah. And so we went through that process, and I answered the questions, and then he put in the paperwork and said that they would sponsor me. I had no idea what I was getting myself into.
Well, I'll ask you more about that in a second, but I just want to say thank you, Sam, for your support. I really appreciate it. And TGYK kind of is already taking this where I was going to go next. He wants to know what is the opinion of the current state of police morale in the U.S. And that was actually going to be my very next question, Corinne. It was like, what is it like to be a cop right now?
Well, when I think about that and I think about my experience and the challenges that I've had before and after with my life experience, I think about there is a shield up right now with law enforcement. And I read this really great peer-reviewed literature article the other day that talked about the perspective of trust from the lens of the police officer to the community. And I think that that's a really important focus to look at it, because when you talk about the morale of the officers now who are sworn and working, they know that their community is struggling and in pain, and they want to answer that call because that's what they do. They answer calls for service. But they have to have this shield up right now that keeps them from wanting to have an open dialogue about the morale that they feel in the things that they're facing. And as long as that shield is up and that armor is on, there's not a lot of positivity that can be exchanged back and forth, and that really takes a toll. But they are, as ever, dedicated and there to answer the calls of service regardless of the events that are happening day by day.
Yeah. And I think, when I've seen footage of the different riots and the things that have been going on, it's very striking to me. I'm gonna be honest, I never really think about the police. Like ever. It's just not I live in New Hampshire. It's a quiet place. We don't have Antifa running around causing trouble. Like I even very rarely will even see the police. So it's not in my frame of reference. But in watching this footage of the riots, the times when it's been so striking to me about this service mindset that you're hitting on is when you have these awful people like throwing things at the cops and yelling at the cops and creating all this havoc, and they just take it. And then if people need help, they go and they do their job, even if these were the same people that were berating them a moment before. And that to me takes a really big person with some kind of like personal objective to be able to do that. I don't think I could do that if I was in there. I mean, I'm sure I would receive lots of training if I put myself in that position, which will never happen because I'm not that strong of a person. But like I cannot imagine what it is like to be in their shoes. Like, so how would you, and understanding this is coming from your perspective, that's the only thing that you can really speak to, you can't speak for anyone else, how would you characterize their morale right now with what's going on, the police officers that maybe
The morale of the police officers I know that are the ones standing on that line, is that what you're
Yeah.
asking?
Yeah.
Well, I think that it's really important to remember that behind the badge, there's a human being who's part of that same community that is in so much pain. And I think that when we are in uniform, we take the perspective that we're there to serve and answer the calls for service that are needed. And that's something deeper than, it's a deeper commitment than how we feel about the political topics or the different things that are going on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you're not supposed to have any feelings about any political topics when you're in uniform, right?
Right.
Well, I mean, you can have feelings, but you can't do anything with them.
I think that remembering that the human element is always there, there's a process in which when you become a police officer, you learn what you're capable of and the discernment of how to use that as fuel. And so you have an emotional response just like everybody else, but you try to be aware and try to stay cognitive of the mission and the call for service and the job that you have at that time. And I think that that is something that I know in my experience that I held on to very much.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Would you characterize, and please tell me if I'm completely off base here, but my perception of the job that they're trying to do when they're out among like if I look at someplace like Portland, where they're among like the kind of like a really hostile environment, it seems to me like the job they're trying to do is to keep people safe. Am I right about that?
Yeah, yes, they protect and serve and enforce the law. That's what they're sworn to do, and that's their role in their community, and that's what they hold on to, what we hold on to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And not to put too fine a point on this, but you guys aren't trying to oppress anyone.
No.
That was a joke, but that's okay. All right, Mallory has a question here, and this actually aligns with something we wanted to talk about as well. She says, "Hi, I have been wondering how I can support my local police force. I live close to a city that is disbanding their police, and I'm not for it at all. Do you have any advice for Mallory?"
Well, first, I'd like to say thank you, Mallory, sincerely, that you want to be supportive. The support that any officer gets, the support that we get, is really meaningful. And I think that the best way to do that is by just when you have interactions, using positive affirmations And when officers get the opportunity to be home and to not be working, to be allowed to relax and enjoy the time that they have with their families, that I think is a really big support for their officers. That when I speak with officers, that's one of the things that they talk about the most. And I know that for me, when I was working and right now in the different arena that I'm working in, the support means a lot. So thank you, Mallory.
For people who have law enforcement officers in their life and, you know, maybe their friends, maybe their family members, what would you like them to know that, you know, to help that person, to be a support system for that person? What should they know?
I think that there are a lot of really great resources um, to help with connection, but that human connection is so important. And understanding that when you are in law enforcement, there is a hypervigilance that has an impact on your ability to interact and the way that you make decisions. And so when, for example, even in the simple act of pulling over a car, there are a lot of things going through your mind, the daily tasks of the job, answering any call for service. There's a lot of things that go into that. And when I am answering a call, there is a hypervigilance that is necessary for me to do my job. And when I come home, I know that there has to be a transition between that environment and my own personal, individual, social, and family environment. And the process of going between those can be really difficult. And so being supportive and working together, collaborating, and having a discussion around smoothing that transition, and that's really important.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Do you have any specific advice for things that people can do to help with that transition?
I think right now that's really individual.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody is different. And so the things that are comforting, the things that help, kind of like how you talk about how everyone has a different work style. I think
Mm-hmm.
that everyone's language of appreciation and comfort is different. And so when you interact with your officer, really you will be able to have a better idea of what that officer reacts positively to and what things are comforting. Just taking time to allow for it to be okay, for there to be a transition, and to share a space where you can have a dialogue and learn the language is really meaningful.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like what you're saying is that, have the conversation and let them know that you care about them and you want to support them and find out what ways they want to be supported.
Yes, and I think that allowing for a space where you can have quiet too, and allowing that to be okay, it can be very difficult. I know that in my own experience, coming home and doing that transition, there were times where I just really needed to be able to be quiet and kind of reflect, and so that was really important for me, but letting that not be a negative thing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I completely identify with that, honestly. There, like, sometimes at the end of the day, I just want everyone to shut up and leave me alone. And by everyone, I mean my husband, who's probably watching downstairs. Honey, I love you. But no, I totally identify. Like, you just like want quiet and to think for, a second. Um, So let's get into your program because you became a reserve officer because you made the choice to go back to college as a police officer, which I think is a whole other thing I have questions about. And the program you selected was specifically to help you develop and have the tools and the resources and the knowledge and support to develop this pilot program for an internal whole wellness framework. When I say internal whole wellness framework, what does that mean?
So I think that there's a little bit of an explanation that has to go before I can go into that, because I don't want to get lost in data and lexicon and different verbiage that we just don't, translator needed kind of things.
Let's do it.
So, all right. So after being on patrol, I encountered a couple of really big health crises in my own life. And there was something that is really jarring about understanding that sometimes sometimes there are things out of your control that can take everything away, and that can be really jarring. And when that happened to me, and I had to look in the face that I might have to put down everything that I had worked so hard to accomplish, it really broadened my perspective of the lack of resources to deal with something like that. And I had a lot of support. There are amazing officers that I know, amazing people that are really supportive, that I'm very grateful for. And in that kind of broadening of my perspective, there became obvious to me a need. And in that, I really wanted to pay a little bit more attention to that. So what I started to do was started looking for the research, the literature, so what do we have that's here for this kind of situation? And during that time, there was a little bit of a curiosity inside the department for looking into wellness. There's a lot of training, self-care, and interacting with community policing, those kind of connections happening. And so the department I worked in, we looking into that a little bit more. And when I started to look into that and found there wasn't a lot out there's not a lot of literature that looks into this topic of stress management in a data way. Like, this is the research that's been done, this is the literature, these are the strategies. So with that absence, I thought about the educational aspect, and I said, well, if the literature is not out there, and a lot of law enforcement are looking for these answers, a lot of training and standards kind of questions, physical fitness standards, those kind of things, maybe we can connect with the universities and see who's doing research. And so I started looking there, wasn't finding a lot. And then I stumbled on the Arbinger Institute, and they had a case study with Kansas City Police Department that was really impressive. And their material that I was able to get a hold of was from around 1998, where the Kansas City Police Department was doing a collaboration with the community and different organizations to come together and answer needs in the community and train their officers. They had a SWAT team that was getting about 2 to 3 complaints a month, and there was a lot of cost in that. But in this case study, Arbinger brought the material that they had developed, which is a concept of seeing people as people and kind of opening your mindset. It's really great material. But what was really striking about this was that after applying the Arbinger material, this SWAT team went 8 years without a written complaint. And it really...
Wow.
Yes. And it really changed the way that they were interacting. And so Arbinger was like, wow, there's a need here, and this was really great results. I mean, 8 years, that's a long time. And they went 10 years without a complaint filed against them in service of a search warrant, which is really impressive. So they developed a law enforcement tier to their program. So I was really excited and jazzed. I was like, oh, look, this is great. So I'd like to look into this wellness program and see what this is all about. And I called and I was really excited, and I wanted to know how I could get this material into my department. And I made contact, and it's been an amazing experience. I contacted the lead of that SWAT team, who's now in a higher rank, and his name is Chip Hughes, and he and Jack Caldwell are the main figures of this law enforcement tier for Arbinger. And interacting with them was so amazing. And they are kind of a top-down based curriculum. So they have the cost of having that kind of training, which you're executive coaching, what that looks like. Yes. And that's what it is. Arbinger is based in that world. And so bringing that into the law enforcement world is a really interesting mix, but very productive. And they're in the process of doing some really exciting research. But as a patrol officer connecting with them, there's a little bit of a disconnect, because usually the people who connect with them were of higher rank. And so I was really excited, and I really wanted to dive into their training. I got into that. I applied for a grant and was able to get the money that I needed to go to their training, to become a facilitator, and I was so excited about it. But in that, I found there was a barrier, and that barrier was that it's not accessible to the officers who are on that line, who are working that patrol, unless it's bought into by the department. And the departments have so many things that they're trying to bring in to the benefit to answer these questions, and because of that lack of accessibility, there's an issue. So I returned back to the school topic, and I said, okay, so what can I do to find something that's accessible, more accessible to all the officers? And in that process, I discovered the stone wheel of public health without knowing it. And the programs that were offered at the local university, the public health was the one that made the most sense for what I was looking into. And I said, if we're going to do this, I want to learn how to do program planning. I want to learn about what that process looks like, what the research says. And so I contacted the director of the undergrad program for public health, and I asked for an appointment, and I said, yes, I'm a law enforcement officer. I'm looking into wellness and health promotion, and I'd really like to look into this. So we set up a meeting, and I went in, and they were really kind to me in an arena that I was totally unaware of. And they're like, you should come back to school for this. You are really meant to be public health. Like, you are doing that in your field. This is amazing. We're really excited about this. And I was like, I'm not going to go back to school. I'm 30. I have a job, a career. I have kids. I'm not going to come back. That's crazy, right? But then again, through my experiences interacting with officers, and through my own experience and needs while I was working on the road most of the time, I have a sincere desire to help provide resources that are tangible to the officers that are working. I have seen and heard so many stories, and I just want to be an advocate for health promotion there. And so I decided, well, let's take a few classes, let's get into it, and let's see what I can do. So I went back to school part-time at first, and then I made this transition between, this is something I was interested in, something that I could spend time doing, to this is a call for service that I want to answer, and that I was going to do everything in my power to go down this road and learn as much as I could so that I could bring it back to my home base and give resources. So then I went full time into public health.
Awesome. I mean, and I can't imagine that decision to go back to college, like for an undergraduate education after 30, I think I would have run screaming in the other direction. Because that's an intimidating challenge in general. And then considering the current state of higher education, that's a whole extra challenge on top of it. So before we get into your program and what you've developed through a long time of like years of hard work, right? And perseverance and taking classes and doing your thing and while you're raising a family. What was it like to go back to school while being a cop with these little uppity undergraduates?
Okay. So,
and you look like you just wanted to cry just then.
Well, your reference to wanting to run screaming, I can say that there have been those moments. And going back to school full time was culture shock. But let's think about this in a broader sense. So I grew up in an area that was poverty. And when we think about adverse childhood experiences, I don't know if you're familiar with that survey. There's some of that in my history. I had a very individual experience with the public school system, and going into getting my associate's degree, when I was 20, in early 20s, associate's degree, it was a culture shock then, and I was at a community college in Los Angeles County. So going to an actual university, a 4-year university, and not really understanding what that was going to look like anyways, because that was something that was completely intangible for me when I was the same age as most undergrads, was culture shock. It was complete. I didn't know what to do with myself for a little while. There's that, transition. Even though I already had my associate's degree, so I was technically a non-traditional student with life experience, I think that there was a lot of the shock that people experience when they go in for freshman year, and they were like, whoa, this is a totally different world. So that was an experience. The faculty and staff that I have interacted with in the public health program that I'm in have been so kind and so patient with me and my learning curve and my non-traditional life experience applied in the classroom. There has been a lot of positive reinforcement when I ran into barriers. So there's a lot of positive there. But there are experiences that I had that were quite negative going back, especially when being identified as a law enforcement officer in that environment. But when I think about those negative experiences, I try to embrace them as learning experiences, because this is my community. This is my interaction, my human interaction with other humans, and that's really important to me. And from some of the challenges that could maintain negativity with me, I have learned so much, and it's just really broadened my ability to be able to interact. So I'm really grateful for that experience.
So I want to put a little bit of a point on this, because what you just described are taking negative experiences and turning them into opportunities, which is a key aspect of being just a resilient human being in general, right? And I think that this is a really important point to hit on, because we talk about, especially when it comes to colleges, safe spaces where no one ever has to have their feelings hurt and no one ever has to be challenged. And, they have puppies running around and whatever else they do in safe spaces. You did what I wish more people in college would do, and perhaps it was because of your life experience that you were able to do this, which is to take something that maybe wasn't a pleasant experience in regards to how the other students treated you when they found out you were a cop, and said, you know what, it's just an experience. This is not the end of the world. I'm going to get through this. I'm going to get around it. And that's what builds character. at the end of the day, I think. What do you think?
I definitely think that the challenges that I have experienced in my life in all arenas have accumulated into the person that I am today and give me the ability to do things now. And I would not take away those challenges. So I also interact with the Wellness and Prevention Office on the campus that I'm getting my degree in. And they have an amazing team. And what I learned from them during this process is when we think about when you were talking about safe space, this really stood out to me. When you think about what a safe place could be, is to be able to have open dialogue, to be able to talk without being afraid of being canceled or labeled in any form on any side of the table, and to be able to sit at that table together, and how important that is in all arenas. When you talk about being students on a campus and coming from different backgrounds and having different concepts and ideas and theories and all the things that you bring to the table while you're developing and learning how to face those challenges, is what I think a safe place could potentially be, instead of attacking and creating more separatism. And what I learned in that arena, which I'm really grateful for, because of the way that the Wellness and Prevention Office family challenged me, was to push in directions that I had never thought about, and be able to have open dialogue. And they encouraged it, and it was a challenge. And so, having that discussion and bringing in concepts of working through the wellness concepts and ideas from a law enforcement perspective, and being at a crossroad with public health. I mean, that's a really interesting crossroad to sit, because they are very on the top level. You could think that they're completely different species, like it's just totally different things. But when you dive into it, and you dive into having that dialogue with people who are outside and from all over in different kind of backgrounds, you learn that you can't have public health or health promotion without enforcement. You can't have, and you look at the classic examples of public health, like the seatbelt law. So that is not, police officers did not make the seatbelt law. They enforce the seatbelt law. They don't make laws, they enforce them. Public health interventions and all of these other programs bring forth and say, we want this to be a law, we want to keep people safe, we want these things, is very important. But as much as they push, and as much as they do, and as much as they advocate, without enforcement, they have no teeth. And so public health and law enforcement have to be able to go together. But when you bring in the human element and the discussions, and when you add in concepts that separate, then that crossroads can get really confusing.
I just want to make note too that New Hampshire is the only state that does not have a seatbelt law. So there is no enforcement of the seatbelt law where I live, although I do always wear my seatbelt. I'm not a moron. So guys, if you're enjoying this chat with Corinne so far, oh God, sorry about that. Please go ahead, subscribe to my channel. I try to do chats and live conversations like this at least once a week. It usually works out. Sometimes it doesn't, but I really do my best to catch up. So please subscribe, hit the thumbs up, all that good stuff. All right, I want to talk about your program, because this is the piece when we initially talked that I was just absolutely blown away with the idea that you had, and frankly, how much work you had put into it. And we're not gonna be able to see everything you've done today, sadly, but I do want to get a high-level overview of what your program is about and what are the benefits of your program.
Okay, so what my program is about is actually a small piece of the work that's been going on for the last 30 years with law enforcement and training and all of the communities and stakeholders that come together. And so when I connected with Arbinger, I had the amazing opportunity to go to their annual summit last year. And through that summit, I was able to connect with other professionals in the field who opened my eyes to a lot of different things, and things that worked and things that didn't. And I think that that conversation about things that don't work is really important, because that's how we learn. And so having those conversations with people that I connected with there, and then bringing that home to my home base with the officers I interact with on a regular basis, there was this collaboration that was this beautiful thing. And so some of the people that I've collaborated with, one in particular is the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department. So they had kind of a perfect storm of people who recognized a call of, and the way that I understand it from my interaction with them is that prior to 2010, they had a corrections board. And so when there are officers who are struggling with different things, and when they get held accountable, because everyone needs to be held accountable regardless of anything. So there are systems inside law enforcement that may not seem so obvious that do have an accountability cord to them. So this corrections board started noticing patterns, and the way that they answered that call in the patterns that they saw was that they wanted to kind of move to a prevention model. So they had a perfect storm of people who understood those concepts, and they spent time transitioning from a strictly corrections board to kind of a wellness board. And in 2010, they opened up an office of professional development and wellness. And their program is the only recognized successful internal program in the United States at that time. And they had spent the last 10 years doing trainings and service. This is a peer mentoring, peer support program, which has crisis intervention for law enforcement officers, which just brought all of these resources together. And they did this beautiful thing where they had officers who work in this office who go and vet resources in the community or outside the community that answer the needs of the officers in their department. And that's really impressive. One of the things that is so mind-blowing about this is that most of this is run on volunteer hours. These officers in this department were able to be supported by this framework and volunteer to have these roles, these peer mentoring roles and support to build this wellness program inside their department. And so they received a grant, and they were able to go around the country and travel and talk about what they've been able to do. And that's really exciting. So when I was interacting with them, I was able to get them to come to this area where I am and do a presentation on this, where they had a pre-survey and a post-survey, and they collected data. So this program collected data from officers all over the country, which is really exciting. But no one has partnered to do research with them, as far as I'm aware of. The last time I was in contact with them, no one had partnered to do research on the data that they collected. And they have statisticians that were processing that, and they were in the process of doing that. So that's going to be really exciting when we see that happen. One of the challenges that they communicated with me that they run into in making this resource from an internal perspective is that departments said, well, we can't afford that. We don't have money for that. We don't have time to do that. You know, there are other resources, and so that's a problem. So when they come and they have their representatives from their department do their presentation on this, they're really trying to drive home, no, you can do this. It doesn't matter how big or small your department is, you can do this. But there's a lot of resistance to that. And the conversations around stress management and officer wellness, these are not new conversations. These are conversations that have been happening. Like I said, I've interacted with people who have been working on this for 30 years and doing incredible work. So in the collaborative conversation with them, the question was, okay, so how do we get this to a place where we can build an internal framework that the data shows that there's a need, and that the response of the officers is a good response when it's from a peer mentoring and the peer support perspective. Because when I was talking earlier and talking about those shields being up, this officer that I love dearly said this wise thing to me. He said, it would not matter if you brought in the experts from a global level to a rural police department. They could come and they could say, wow, these are all these amazing things that you can do, and I'm going to teach you how to do it, and I'm going to be your coach, I'm going to be your Carlin, and we're going to get through this. Those officers are not going to listen.
It would never work. Yeah.
No. And so that inside is where this framework has to happen. And so how do you get that to happen? And every single department I talk to, every officer who's been working on this for so long, that's always the challenge they run into. It's how do you get this to work in smaller departments who don't have bigger budgets, or departments who don't commit a budget to this kind of thing, and make it accessible to the officers. And so that was the question I was left with. So while I was doing my public health and doing interventions training and behavior model theory and all of these things, putting everything together and building these great, beautiful plans, everyone's like, oh, I have the answer. The answer is here. It's that accessibility that always gets you, and how are you going to pay for it? So I was challenging myself to find this answer and how to bring this health promotion and wellness and prevention to an internal level, like Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department has done, and get there. How do we get that to the officers? And so I was reading a peer-reviewed article, and I found this article about community health workers. And this article was about how North Carolina did a pilot program on community health workers, because this is traditionally a grant-funded position inside a medical clinic. So, for example, if you have a diabetes clinic, the community health worker is the person that the patient connects with. They can call for questions when they're going through this process. They do grocery shop tours. They connect with the community. Just that support that people need to really go to those uncomfortable places and conquer their challenges and from these clinics. So in diabetes clinics, that getting their diabetes under control and finding the ways to deal with that. So the community health worker is a really important position, but this is normally grant funded. And what this article was talking about was the importance of how much this role makes on a community level, and that it needs to not be grant funded, because as soon as the clinic runs out of that grant and they lose that position, their results tank, because it's such a vital role. So they did this pilot program where they measured everything, and they had a measurable success with showing that this role really has a return of investment. And they were so successful with this within just 3 or 4 months of this pilot program that the insurance company said, yes, we will pay for this position to be permanent. This is going to help people. This is going to save money. There's going to be return on this. We definitely need this position there because of this hard work that these people did to show that this was such a vital role. So I started looking into that community health worker role. What is a community health worker? And that community level champion that everybody looks for when thinking about interventions and different programs, that's a vital key. I mean, even now, you can read articles with the COVID epidemic, and that community health worker in different countries and in different scenarios and communities is a vital educational tool, but it also you can't have a successful intervention without having a buy-in with the community. And in order to do something like that, you have to have community level work. That collaboration is so important. So the thought process for me was that if we had a framework like Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department that added in specific pillars of wellness that can be collaboratively developed, and if you had a community health worker law enforcement officer who is part of that community, with the sole purpose of developing and catering around the needs of that department, the tremendous measurable difference that would make. And if you can show that to an insurer, that how valuable that is, that they would, after 4 months of data, pay for that program because of how much of a difference it's making. What's the one thing that every police department in the United States has? Liability insurance and health insurance. And so my work then shifted to being really focused around this community health worker concept, merging that with everything that I had learned from public health, everything that I had learned in my training and experience, all of my life experience, and with the mentorship and guidance that I've had with the officers that I interact with on a regular basis, and putting all of that together to see what this would actually look like. And that collaboration is the key to making all of that work. And so now, at the end of my undergrad, which I know that my faculty and staff are so excited about that, we're coming all together and using the last bit of my internship portion of my program to do a pilot needs assessment with a department and a pilot program so that we can collect the pre and post data and the needs assessment data and tailor this framework for this department to show the benefits that 30 years or more hard work that's been happening is represented in a measurable way to show the difference of what this internal framework is going to do.
Okay, so I just want to make sure, I just want to break it down like I'm a 5-year-old and don't understand anything for a second. So the plan is to have an officer that's already there do some sort of training or facilitator program like you did to learn how to implement these tactics, and then they become like the community wellness officer on their police force, paid for by the insurance company, because it's going to save them so much money to have someone like that there and in that dedicated position. Do I have that about right?
About right. The role of that officer is not just to do training, it's to be an integral part of the wellness and prevention for that department, and really having their time spent knowing the needs, answering that call for service from inside, so that they can interact with the community to make sure that there's a collaboration happening so that everyone works together to meet the goals.
Right. And then, well, then there's someone that the police officers are going to trust, right? Because it's one of them. It's not someone like me who's coming in from the outside. They're going to be like, who does she think she is? But it's one of them. And that makes a difference, right?
Absolutely. It has to be a community member of law enforcement in this position, and it has to be someone who can build a relationship to be able to collaborate with the officers of that department, regardless of rank or years of service. So that's a really big role, but it also opens the door for resources that are not available right now, which lead some of the challenges that are facing law enforcement.
And the insurance companies are willing to pay for this because they see the benefit of it.
That's the hope and the argument. With the data in hand and the collaboration with law enforcement agencies from all over the country who have been working on this, I think that there's a really good platform there to show that this is absolutely worth it. When you look at onboarding costs, when you look at the cost of litigation, when you look at the cost of those kind of monetary things, but then you also look at the cost of the stress on the officer. There are studies that go back all the way to Vietnam that show being in law enforcement in the United States costs the officer an average of 22-year life deficiency in life expectancy just by serving in law enforcement. And when you make the decision to serve in that role and to answer those calls, something in that transition changes. It's not just a uniform that you can put on and take off and, you know, go home at the end of the day and not have the impact of that service. And that shows in the public health crisis facing law enforcement that is underserved, that's not being answered.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So what are some of the tangible differences that this position would make? Like what makes it worth investing in? Like what does some of the data tell you right now about the impact this would have?
Well, I think that to answer that, I have to go to some of the specific challenges that are facing law enforcement right now. And
Okay.
one of those is more officers are lost to suicide a year than in line of duty deaths. And I remember when I first realized that and saw those numbers and the impact that that had on me. And this is the first year that law enforcement loss to suicide is officially being tracked. Before 2020, it was not
Wow.
officially being tracked. And so all the numbers that we had that were showing us that this was outnumbering in line of duty death are people who are willing to say out loud and talk about the stories and that are reported on a voluntary basis because it was not being officially tracked. And so the stress that happens because of the job and the cost, you're not just looking also at the individual officer, you're looking at a multi-generational impact because that officer goes home, that officer has a spouse, a partner, interacts with friends, interacts with their children. There's so many facets. This is a community level kind of thing, and so the impact, the tangible impact on this in providing a way for these officers to gain access to these resources will help the officer take better care of themselves, to know how to do that in a healthy way, and to be able to self-reflect and to open dialogue that hasn't been opened because it wasn't available. There's not a lot of time. And I think something that's really, really important to understand. So when you become a police officer, you are trained to process a crime scene for evidence. You're trained and taught what to look for. You're trained and taught to look and listen for deception. But you are not taught how your body and mind process what you're processing. And the immediate impact that's going to come from this, like in Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department and their data, also the Fairfax County in Virginia did a first responder pilot survey that also showed the immediate impact is going to show, because there's going to be a new resource in their hands and they're going to be able to do something that they haven't been able to do before, and opening those doors. And so I think that the expense of onboarding and litigation and replacing an officer who might be lost or who might leave the job is immediately tangible also. But also, when you think about the mindset, having officers be able to interact with each other and see each other as people and go out in the field to answer those calls for service and be able to not have the different layers of shield that are up because they're prepared. Something that comes to mind in answering this question was an interview that I watched with Jocko Willink and Joe Rogan. They were talking about this, and Jocko brought up the fact that officers need to have the communities reinvest in their training. So when you think about a first responder and you think about firefighters and medics and you think about the way their shifts work, law enforcement spends a minimum 12-hour shift responding to the worst moments of everyone else's life. And they do that going from call to call to call. And most of the time, there are not enough officers to keep the calls for service from tallying up. So when you're on a call for service, there is a possibility that you have 3 calls waiting. And so you spend that 12 hours. And then on top of that, if you have a call that maybe will take your time, just because your 12-hour shift is up doesn't mean that you're like, okay, well, the next officer is going to come, and so you can interact with them and I'll see you later. Like, there are times where, in my experience, I was at the end of a 12-hour shift and I worked an extra 5 hours because of a collision or whatever that call for service looked like. So when you think about that, how are they doing any prevention? What resources do they have for that prevention and training? Jocko brought up a point that he said officers need to be able to train 1/5 of their time to prepare for this, in minimum. And I can tell you that from my experience and from interacting with other officers, that's a daydream. We would love to be able to invest, but the calls keep coming. And as long as those calls keep coming, we keep answering.
And so I think for me, part of this plan in the genius of this is in the impact of it and in making that case to insurance companies to pay for it. Because this was really the biggest challenge that you were trying to tackle, was making this accessible to anyone. Like, if you have a small police force that doesn't have a whole lot of resources, this can still be accessible to you, right?
Yes, and that is the main goal, the main mission that I have, is to find a way to make this accessible to every police officer, everybody in law enforcement and in their community, regardless of years served or position or how big or small their department is. And I think that is one of the last barriers to getting the resources that are needed.
Mm-hmm. So I just want to call out something in the chat, and Corinne, this is not about you. I'm a little annoyed at the chat right now. In bad protocol, I'm calling out you, because you're in the chat right now talking about lots of professions come with pressure, and oh my God, this is what medical residents see. Talk about seeing people at their worst. No. This is not what we're talking about. This is not about a dick swinging competition to say which profession has to work under the most pressure. Today, we are talking about a plan that Corinne has put together in order to serve people in a very stressful profession that, I'm sorry, right now, I'm going to make a guess that it's probably more stressful to be a cop than it is to be like a medical student. I'm given what's going on in our society, I'm just going to make a guess about that. And even if it's not, it doesn't matter, because just because one profession is stressful does not mean that we shouldn't serve people in another profession. This is not a competition. And if she can come up with something that works in law enforcement, then maybe that can be spread to other areas. So don't be a jackass in my chat. This is an important conversation, and this is not a contest, okay? I'm sorry. I felt the need to say that. Bad protocol, you come to my chats often. I like you, man, but don't fuck around. Pardon my language. I don't know why I'm conscious about swearing in this one. I swear all the time, but that's how I feel about it. All right. So now, in order to move forward, you need to pilot this program. And I just learned that you are doing a pilot with a program with a police force. Tell us about your pilot.
Well, it is going to be collaborating with Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department and their data, and hopefully with also the Virginia Public Safety Health survey, and building that needs assessment format to help with building this framework. And so taking that and doing a needs assessment in collaboration with the officers at this department, and then taking their response and their vocalized needs and using that as a starting point so that they understand that they are part of this process and that is the concept of building inside and answering their calls and what they need to be focused on first. So then taking that needs assessment and building the framework through these pillars of wellness lenses based on the things that they need, and then applying that program. And when going through that process and collaborating with them on this, helping build a structure where they can learn to interact with each other and uphold this framework, so that when I'm done with my pilot program, I'm handing this thing to them so that they have it. As I move on into my master's program, they have this product, they have this system, this framework that they can build off of and cater to their department, and hopefully give to others also. That collaboration and that key, as many officers as can be reached with this, is the whole point. And then taking that data and that pilot program and that product and then presenting it to the stakeholders and showing them that measurable difference and the achievements that this department has because their collaboration was enabled. That's what that's gonna hopefully look like. That's the goal, and I'm so excited about this opportunity. And it's funny because when you are new out of the police academy as the basic law enforcement training, and you hit the road after field training and you're on your own that first day, man, you just are biting at the chomp. Well, this is the first time since then that I've kind of experienced that excitement. I'm biting at the chomp. I want to just go, but I know that discipline is going to be the key, and doing slow professional work, gathering the data in a real statistically sound manner, building the presentation, building the program plan, doing the different preps for grant writing, and sharing everything that I've learned and helping build and uplift this framework. I'm so excited about this.
Well, I'm excited about it too, because I think that this program has the potential to have so much impact in the world. And guys in the chat, I just want to emphasize again, this is not a pissing contest. If you can do something good in the world, you do it. And I think that this is a community right now that needs this type of support, has probably needed this type of support for a very, very long time. And this is a way that they can be provided with that in a way that's going to work for them. And the reason I really wanted to have this chat with you is I wanted to get this idea more exposure. I wanted to get you out there. I wanted to, if I have the ability to, through doing a chat like this, connect you with anyone that might want to try to pilot this program. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. Her contact information is in the description below. That I wanted to do that because, it's so impressive what you've done in terms of, you went back to undergrad for this, man. Like, as that by itself is daunting. And you've done all the work. I mean, guys, I've seen some of the documents she's put together on the back end. She's got the whole thing far more planned out than I ever had any program planned out when I first launched it. And so I think there's a lot of there. And I commend you too on the discipline that you're taking in terms of, pragmatically doing the pilot, collecting the data, because that is not a sexy part of the job at all. It's something that would absolutely drive me insane because I want everything done like yesterday. But it's the right way to do it if you want to really, solidify your case for why this needs to happen and the impact of it, and to get the insurance companies to pony up, right?
Collaborate. I like the idea and importance of collaborating, Carlin.
She's more diplomatic than I am.
But honestly, there's a lot of different hurdles in that. You're right. This is not the sexy part at all. This is not the flashy awesomeness. But this is the most sincere service, the expression of my love for the profession, for the people who wear the badge, for the human beings inside of that, and for the people and community they serve. I need that to be really clear. Collaboration is the only way. They have been, and by they, I mean people in the field and people outside who support this field have been working for decades rolling that ball, that stone uphill. And the only way that we can make this work and get these resources where they're vitally needed so that we can take care of our community and protect and serve the way that we're meant to is if we all come together and work together to make this happen. And so I want that to be clear. I'm imploring you, if you are working on this, if you are putting time, if you see the need, if you're hearing the call in your own department or in your family, reach out. Let's connect you and connect us and collaborate so that we can move this together into a place where they haven't been able to move it.
Mm-hmm. And what I love about you too is this is like not an ego trip for you to be doing this. I mean, this is a genuine calling that you feel compelled to do this. And, I mean, I believe in I think that we're all put here for different reasons, and I think we all have different reasons that we chose to experience life in the way that we have, and that includes the ups and the downs. And it strikes me that the downs that you've experienced in your life, both the ones we've talked about here and the ones that you and I have talked about privately, that's what set you up to be in a position to do something like this that will really, really help a lot of people. And so, I guess, I'm going to just echo your ask and say, if people are thinking about this, if you're working on something similar, please get in touch. This should be a group effort. All the resources should come together to be working on this. This should not be about, oh, it's my program. Oh, no, it's my program and all this stuff. No, that's not the point. I think one of the things that drives me crazy about the world right now is that so many people are they're just in it to feed their own egos, and there's no greater goal, and there's no willingness to compromise in order to get everyone across the finish line. And so many people would rather not get to the finish line to take that win than they would working with people that they don't know or that are bringing a different perspective to make it to the goal. And so that's not what you're doing in this at all, right?
Right. And I would like to take a moment of appreciation while we're on this topic. One of the things in your local community that you say all the time is like you're empowering people to use their voice and to own, this is my contribution. And the concept of me being able to sit at this table after all of my life experience, all of my training, all of the struggles, all of the challenges, to be able to sit at this table and really look at, well, where did this come from? And I can tell you, I know the moment that this idea birthed, that this project rooted from. And it culminated of all of the challenges I had overcome to be able to even have this awareness. But there's one specific officer who really impacted me. And he signs all of his emails with a servant heart. And I cannot describe him in a better way than that. He is somebody who served our country in the military before he served as a law enforcement officer. He has given so much. When you think about the person that you will want to stand next with you in whatever challenge you're facing, this man is it. And I remember the first time I interacted with him, the love and the compassion that just exhumed from him was disorienting. And this officer was my physical fitness trainer in basic law enforcement training. So he was not trying to be my friend, if you know what I mean. And he put me through an experience that introduced me to my own capability and gave me the opportunity to use that knowledge to make a choice to commit to this. And when I sit at this table and I look at him sitting at this table and all that he's given to this profession, and all he's done to support me in the different challenges that I've faced in this work and in this direction that I've gone. I want to be able to develop the way to answer the calls for service that come from our officers who serve with a servant's heart. And nobody asked me to do this. Nobody said, hey, we want you to be our advocate. We want you to do this. Being able to be aware of the struggles and watching what happens when the impact of the stress of this job, and seeing the warriors who do this every day, who stand on that line, who have things thrown at them, who make the choice to be there. And it isn't so sexy all the time. It isn't so awesome and picturesque. There are times where even I, with my limited experience in this field, because I'm just beginning still, but I question, what am I doing here? Why did I do this? Why did I choose to do this? How am I going to? When I first started looking for jobs, I was applying to jobs that paid $27,000 a year, Carlin, to be a police officer, and buying my own boots. And when you switch to reserves, you buy your ammunition for practice. You purchase your own handgun for a patrol weapon. You invest in this and you give to this. And I want to take care of those officers because I see them. I see them for the human that they are. And I know that in every interaction, regardless of the consequence and manifestation of the stress of the job, every interaction they have is from one human being to another human being. And I want to be a resource to nurture that and help them get through the job so that at the end of the day, there isn't a 22-year life deficiency expectation. They get to go home and be with their families and enjoy what privilege we have in being in this country, being able to serve and live in these communities and just connect. And so I'm so grateful for the people who helped me get where I am, and that's why I'm doing it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I want to point this out because listen, I want to tell you, Corinne, you're getting a lot of good feedback in the chat. You also have some knuckleheads in the chat that are just not getting it, of course. And I want to emphasize this. I hear people being called grifters every single day of the week, and God knows I get my fair share of that. We're talking to someone here who is genuine in her goals, who is a genuinely good person, who is trying to make a difference in the world. And to approach something like this with cynicism, I mean, listen, something that I completely identify with what you're trying to do, because I tried to do the same thing in the workplace in terms of my programs to build mindfulness strategies to help people at work so they didn't have to be miserable all day, because I just saw no reason for it. And God knows a lot of the people I worked in marketing or finance or higher education or things like that. Nothing remotely as stressful as what you're doing, but they were still very stressed out. And so I can't imagine, there are few industries where something like this could actually have a greater impact, not just on the officers that are going to get the help that they have probably needed for a very, very long time, but that probably they haven't asked for because they have those walls up and, they've got to be the big tough men and all this stuff. But, it's not only going to impact them, it's also going to impact the communities that they serve. It is going to make them better at their job so that some of these incidences that set off riots like this, you're never going to be able to eliminate that stuff entirely, but I strongly believe that mental well-being is a key part of this. Being able to go into situations with a clear head, not being stressed out, Because anytime, like, stress is going to make you physically sick after a while, and once your body starts feeling really, really bad, that's going to impact everything you do in the world, because our mind follows our body follows our mind, all that good stuff. But I guess I'm taking a really long-winded route to say that this is something serious that could have a lot of impact. And this is not something, approach my normal guests that come on for like just media exposure or whatever with a cynical mind, fine, whatever. But what Corinne is trying to do here is serious. She's doing it for the right reasons. And I know that many of you have afforded her respect in the chat. I'm not happy with some of the people that I'm seeing in the chat who are making a joke. And you shouldn't let those people bother you, because they're haters, and that's just the way the internet is, my friend. That is the way it is. Now, Corinne, one of the reasons I wanted to do this, just to kind of wrap things up, because I know we've already been going for an hour and 20 minutes. It's gone by really, really fast, is you are looking to connect with other people who are thinking about these sorts of things, or maybe other departments that want to collaborate with you and maybe host a pilot program. What is the best way for people to get in touch with you?
I think right now the best way is either on LinkedIn, or if they can contact you and you can forward it to me, just because I'm switching into my master's program, and during this pilot program, all of the things like a website and more material and connecting opportunities are in the process of being created.
Okay, so guys, just to reiterate, you can connect with her LinkedIn, which is in the description below, or you can reach out to me. The best place to reach out to me is drcarlin.com, and to go to the contact box, and that comes right to my email. And I'm really backed up on email now, but I promise I'm working through the backlog of email I have, and I will answer it. And if you send it in, I will forward it on to Corinne very, very quickly. Anything else you'd like to add for today?
One thing, this amazing individual that I recently connected with told me one of the most motivating things I've ever heard, and I'd like to share it.
Sure.
In my conversation with her, she said, yes lives in the land of no. And so all negative, complicated intermixing of humans interacting with humans, I take as a learning experience, and I will use everything that I can to work toward this and learn. So I remain open. Thank you for that wisdom.
Thank you. This is good advice you got there. All right, everyone. I hope you enjoyed today's chat. Again, if you are looking to get in touch for any reason, even if you just want to learn more about our program, reach out. I can put you in touch. That's not a problem. Corinne, thank you so much for coming on today and for sharing your wisdom and your experience with us. I really appreciate it. It's a nice little breath of fresh air from the type of kind of content that I normally do. And frankly, I enjoy this a whole heck of a lot more, if I'm honest. So I appreciate you being my guest today. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlin, for this opportunity. I appreciate it.
All right. So guys, I might have one more live stream this week. I'm not sure yet. So I was supposed to be joined tomorrow on the channel by Shoe on Head to have a discussion about why I left the left. Now, she emailed me this morning and apparently is having some internet connectivity problems where she's at. So we might end up postponing that for next week. Don't worry. It is actually going to happen. It just may not happen tomorrow. So keep an eye on this channel and on my social media, and I will update you when I know when that conversation is going to happen. And otherwise, yeah, I will. Thanks for hanging out, guys, and I will see you soon. Bye.